spend time with us last week when we first launched this webinar series. Just by way of context, it has been designed to really provide all of you with an understanding of how to really activate and make yourself in the best position possible to be able to engage with the public sector and private sector contracting agencies that are going to be attending the 2020 Garden State Minority Women and Veteran-Owned Business Summit on December 9th. So I want to first say that registration will be opening soon. You will be receiving, if you are connected here, you probably have received emails from our office. You will be receiving emails this week regarding registration and how to register for the summit. I absolutely would encourage you to do so. It will be your opportunity to be able to be in a space, a virtual space, where you have access to our federal government partners, our state partners, county, municipal, as well as private corporations, all who are looking to source goods and services over the course of the next 12 to 18 months. But in advance of that, we felt that it was important to give you really an understanding of what the procurement process is. We talked about last week what you need to know to do business in the state of New Jersey. That we covered last week, registration, certification, some of the resources that are available to you as business owners through the New Jersey Business Action Center, through the Small Business Development Centers, as well as through the new site, njbiz.com. Information regarding the webinars, as well as the recordings of the webinars, can be found on the Office of Diversity and Inclusion website, and that is www.diversity.nj.gov. So now today, or this week, we're going to talk about the ABCs of procurement, because if you want to be able to provide goods and services to any procurement professional, you've got to understand the language. You have to understand the process. As I said last week, it's like, going to a country and wanting to do business and you don't know how to speak the language. You need to understand the language of procurement. You need to understand the vehicles that procurement professionals use in order for you to then determine what your strategy and approach is to be able to onboard to the procurement systems. So we initially sent out a flyer indicating that Janet Peralta from the U.S. Small Business Development Center would be our speaker for this morning. And unfortunately, Janet became unavailable, and so she will not be able to present to you today. However, do not despair. We have an absolute gem for you. Jeff Roberson is a 30-year procurement professional here in the state of New Jersey. And what we're going to do, which is a little bit different today, is that I'm going to have a conversation with Jeff and walk you through the ABCs of procurement. As is our custom for these series, we are going to set aside 45 minutes for this conversation and discussion. And hopefully during that time, it will touch upon many of the things that you need to know and address some questions that you may have. Nonetheless, if you do have questions, I invite you to put them in the chat box. And 15 minutes before the close of this presentation, we will open it up and discuss some of the questions that are in the chat. Any questions that are unanswered during that time period, have no fear. We will reach out to you directly to ensure that you have the information that you need. A little bit of background on Jeff. He started out his career as a purchasing manager at Prudential Financial, and then moved on from there as a senior buyer for procurement services at Rutgers University. He then left Rutgers to become a purchasing manager at Presbyterian Hospital in New York. And from there, he went on to be the director of support services contracting for Acuity. From Acuity, he went to and his present position as the Director of Contract and Procurement at Hudson County Community College. One of the great things about Jeff and having this discussion with Jeff is that he will be able to provide you with a lens from a private sector procurement professional, a state procurement professional, particularly from the university standpoint, also giving you an understanding of the difference between that and county colleges here in New Jersey, where he presently serves as the Director of Procurement for Hudson County College, as well as just being involved in a number of professional organizations that involve procurement professionals. So at this time, I would like to invite Jeff Roberson to the conversation. Jeff, please join us. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday to you. And thank you so much, Jeff, again, for taking the time out to share your insight and your expertise with those who are gathered with us this morning. So if you may, I gave a little bit of an intro for you, but if you can go into just a little bit more detail in terms of your 30 years of experience and give us an understanding of how that evolved and what some of the nuances are in the different positions that you've held.
Sure. And actually, you know, as I think back on it, you know, in totality, I think my basic procurement experience started probably when I was in the military and just didn't know that it wasn't called procurement back then, or supply chain. So I was an inventory management specialist in the Air Force. Basically, I ordered different parts around the world for aircraft, and so helping individuals, crew chiefs, maintain the basic parts that they needed, and you know, we would have to logistically kind of go, you know, around the world to procure different pieces as they needed repairs and maintenance. So when I think back, that's probably when my initial career as far as supply chain or procurement started. Eventually, when I left the Air Force, I started out at Prudential and kind of I started out in payroll, and you know, I'm one of those people who you know, I like to learn different things. So once I've kind of mastered something else, I would apply for a different position. And through working at Prudential, you know, I left payroll, went into corporate real estate, and then eventually I started working in procurement. And at that point in time, I think that's where I kind of found my niche of what I really wanted to do. There, you know, my undergraduate degree is accounting. So, you know, from accounting, you can work in different fields, and that's basically how I ended up in procurement. I started doing some you know, corporate procurement at Prudential. What I learned at Prudential is that, you know, there's not really rules. It's about relationships, and you know, as long as you document and you know, send out, you know, the proposals, you kind of define what the criteria is to award contracts. But it's very different than being in a government or state space. There's a lot more flexibility with a public or private organization in making those decisions. But I think across the board, regardless of institution, it's about relationships. And you know, I found that whether I was at Prudential, you know, then from there, you know, I went on to Rutgers, and while I was at Rutgers, I got a MBA in supply chain. And from, you know, after I graduated from Rutgers, I proceeded to go work in New York in healthcare with New York Presbyterian and Acuity, which was also healthcare. And those organizations, what was interesting is that they wanted someone to come in and kind of philosophically look at their processes and kind of upgrade them, because they were very, very manual in the process. And they also, in line with that, was looking at how they could do more business with supply diversity. So those are the jobs that I had. Rutgers is unique within itself with regard to the state and four-year colleges. If you go and look at the books for Rutgers, it has a section in the statutes just for Rutgers. So it even operates differently than a four-year school. And after I left healthcare, I ended up at my current position, which is Director of Contracts and Procurement at Hudson County Community College. And what I did know prior to me taking a job is that community colleges are even more stringent than four-year schools. So you have to know the nuances of I guess, each organization. And as you stated earlier, I have worked in kind of each one of those roles: public, private, state, and community. So I have a varied experience of working in each and every one of those, which kind of helps as we go through our procurement process.
So thank you for that, Jeff. I want to dig into this, right? So let's start out with the vehicles, because this is the ABCs, and I'm really committed to making sure that people have an understanding of what are the different types of procurement vehicles that are used by a procurement specialist. So for example, I know in state government, we have RFPs, which means request for proposals. There's an RFQ, which is a request for quotation. There are waivers that allow for procurements to actually be sourced without going through public bidding. There's also what's called delegated purchasing authority, which sets some thresholds as to when you have to go out to public bid and when you don't have to go out to public bid. So if you don't mind, can you give a little tutorial on the different types of procurement vehicles that are used by a procurement specialist when determining how they're going to source goods and services?
Sure. Very much as you commented on, there's requests for proposals, which are RFPs, that are sent out on various goods and services that an organization is looking for. And that's a common tool that is used throughout industries, whether public or private. You have requests for quotation, which is basically what that's saying. You're asking for quotes. You're kind of giving them the specs, and you just want a quoted price on specifically what that vehicle is. Requests for proposals and requests for bids are different because you're laying out the specifications and allowing vendors to kind of fill in what those each and what they individually can offer to you with regard to the bid process.
So let me stop you there. So let's use by way of an example something that you would use and you would send out for, you would use an RFP, a request for a proposal, versus something that you would use where you would put out an RFQ. Can you give examples?
Sure. So simplistically, let's say we you needed sodium chloride, rock salt. If you're being that simplistic, you want to send out a quote. If we need bags of salt, for bags of rock salt, it's pretty much standard in the industry of what you're requesting. So I just, from a volume perspective, and I'm using this example of when I worked for the hospitals. We basically wanted a quote from each vendor of how much it was going to cost, for a 50-pound bag of rock salt. So we requested quotes. With a request for proposal, that is not as simple. It's not as simplistic as just getting a quote for a price for something. There are different nuances with regard to the goods or services that you are requesting, and it's a lot more extensive than just I just need a price for salt. An example of that is Title IX training. Different organizations provide online training. They provide in-person training. They have different modules, different vehicles, different software. So that needs to be a proposal as opposed to just a quote. We can't just get a price for Title IX training.
And so just so everybody is clear, because I like to make sure that we don't just operate in our own acronyms. So when you say Title IX training, what is Title IX?
Title IX training is sexual harassment and discrimination throughout colleges. That is a required federal training regarding to different colleges and universities across the country.
So essentially what you're saying is that colleges and universities are required by the federal government to provide sexual harassment training. That's something that they may source out to some professional to assist them in providing services, correct?
That is correct.
And so what the college or university would do is, in terms of looking for a professional to provide those types of services, they're not going to use an RFQ, which is a request for quote, because there's not a standard. With a request for a proposal, you're looking to see, what type of training they provide. What are the different training offerings that they have? Is it in person? Is it not in person? Or is it online? Is it, let's take a look at the curriculum. So am I correct with a request for a proposal? You're really kind of defining what you're looking for, and then you send that out to, the community to see what they come back in terms of what their offerings are. Did I say that correctly? Because you're the professional, not me.
No, you were very accurate in that assessment and explained in detail the differences.
So let's talk about, I think we clarified the difference between a request for a quote, an RFQ, versus an RFP. But now let's talk about thresholds, right? Because are there not dollar amounts that come into play in terms of how we send out those requests?
Yes, they are. So in typically not in private industry or those public companies, they don't necessarily have thresholds, but most state, county, colleges have dollar thresholds. So basically, from a purchasing, most board of trustees in education don't have to, the dollar threshold with pay-to-play laws is $17,500. So usually, the board will write a resolution indicating the purchasing agent can award those contracts under $17,500. With, of course, depending on the threshold, the number of quotes that you would need to go out and award those contracts. Usually anything over $17,500 has to be approved by Board of Trustees via resolution. Up to $17,000, and the current bid threshold is $44,000. So in between $17,500 and $44,000 $44,000, the Board of Trustees has to award those agreements. There are some exceptions to that. There are emergency contracts that can be awarded in which if the health and safety of the public is at hand, perfect example is coronavirus, then you can award contracts, but you can award emergency contracts, but you still have to go back and do the Board of Trustees resolution. Also, anything over the bid threshold has to be done via request for proposal or anything over that amount, the current 44,000 has to be done via a request for proposal vehicle. You can't get multiple quotes again unless there are different tools, sole source, single source, commodities that exist in which you won't go through the bid process, but they're very stringent guidelines and indicating something is single source or sole source.
Okay, so I'm going to stop you because you said a lot, and I want to make sure that everyone is with us. So let's start at the 17.5.
Sure.
So, and again, we're only talking about on the public sector side, because on the private sector side, as you explained, they don't necessarily use those thresholds. But on the public sector side, when we look at the number of 17,005 and below.
Right.
For any amount, contract amount that's 17,500 or below, as a procurement professional, you are then required to solicit quotes. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And the number of quotes that you are required to solicit is how many?
It varies based off of dollar spend. So under $5,000, you can get a quote. Over that amount, you need 2 quotes, and in between 10 and 17, you need 3 quotes.
Okay, can you repeat that again?
Yes, under $5,000, you can get a quote. Over $5,000, you need multiple quotes. 5,000 to 10, 10 to 17, you need 3 quotes.
So how does a procurement professional like yourself determine who you're going to go out to get the quotes from?
So who we quote from, typically, the way that we try to do at the county, Hudson County community, is that we try to look for local vendors first, within Jersey City area. Outside of that, we try to look for vendors in the county, and if there are vendors in the county outside, then we usually go outside of the county. We try to go within the state, but there are times to where we have to go outside the state.
And so now let's go from 17.5 to 40,000. You said that you are required to have 3 quotes, correct?
No, that you have to do you can do quotes, and you can do a request for proposal, request for bid. You can do quotes depending on the goods and service, but you have to have the Board of Trustees approve a resolution to award those contracts.
And that is in a university context. That's not
that process is not only with universities, it is with municipalities, it is with Board of Educations, it is those public government entities where the Board of Trustees has to do that. So whether not just for colleges, but like I said, Board of Education and municipalities also have to follow similar guidelines.
Thank you for that. So hopefully that's clear that from 17.5 to 40, that you would need to have some type of resolution that allows that awarding by the government entity. I do know, and we are going to have later on this week, Amy Davis from the Department of Treasury, and she's going to speak more specifically in terms of how state departments and agencies handle their procurement. But I just want to qualify that in saying right now we're talking about county, municipal governments, as well as our colleges and universities as it relates to that. So thank you. Now, for 40,000 and above, that has to go out as a public bid, correct?
Correct. You're absolutely correct.
So when you say that it's going to go out now, the purchasing agent, because this amount is more than $40,000, so they are required to now publicly put that bid out. Where would one find that bid solicitation that's being publicly advertised?
So the places that we are required to advertise, and we have to do it depending on the goods and services in advance, typically 10 days in advance of it has to be out on the street. We have to do it in the local newspapers, and on our website is where we have to publicly advertise those bids.
So if I am like the over 100 participants who are on this webinar today, right? I'm a business person who provides goods or services. What advice would you give me as to how I can continue to be informed of when these bids are going out publicly, as well as how would I be able to position myself so that a buyer is aware that they could reach out to me for a quote?
So one of the advice that I would give is definitely where decide, look at where you are capable of doing business. And understand the scope and size of what you can do within, that element. Because what you don't want to do is go ahead and bid on jobs in which they can be overwhelming, or you can't really provide the service, because that doesn't look good for a vendor. So I would decide where and how you can provide services. In addition to that, I would usually call the purchasing department and find out how they advertise. Do you advertise on your website? A lot of municipalities put bids on the township's website. Colleges do the same thing, but some may only advertise in the newspaper. So I would do my due diligence and call those organizations that I want to do business with and find, reach out to the purchasing departments and say, is there a list of public bids? If they are, where are they? And kind of get an understanding of how long those bids are, how long they'll be out, whether they're currently under contract, when those contracts are up. So those are the type of conversations that I would have if I was a vendor looking to do business with those entities.
So thank you for that, Jeff. Now, I want to dig a little bit deeper in terms of strategies for businesses to determine how they position themselves, right? Because we know that in the state of New Jersey, by way of example, our procurement spend is in the billions of dollars. And for someone to want to onboard themselves and to provide goods and services to the state, they have to have the capacity, and I think that's what you were talking about, the capacity to be able to handle the job. So let's talk about, again, from your standpoint, if you're a small business, what would be some of the areas that you think would be a more targeted area to onboard, where the scope and the size of the project may not be as large, and that they kind of start getting an understanding of that rhythm in order to then expand out and up?
Okay, so that's a good question. I think one of the more opportunistic areas is probably professional services, to where the services of accountants, engineers, or those things in which you can provide a service, and again, depending on the organization, those may not be as large of industries in which there's a somewhat easier point of entry with those services, and things of that nature is what I would originally look at. But again, I think that it's important to understand the organization and some of the things that they're putting out to bid, because usually that's on the websites or newspapers, and you can get bid specifications to understand the scope and size of of what the organization is requesting.
I want to switch a little bit and talk about relationships, because I think that is absolutely a dynamic. And you touched upon it initially, right? That
Right.
part of this work is relationships. And again, this is just my own anecdotal view, that it seems to me that if you're a procurement professional and let's go back to the quotation vehicle, where you're going to solicit quotes from folks that you may have a prior relationship with. They've provided you with the goods or service. You feel comfortable with who they are, what they do, so that's who you reach out. Would that be fair?
That is very fair. And one example I will use that is during this pandemic, from a supply chain. It was in the beginning, it was very difficult to get PPE items at the quantities that we needed. What I chose to do is to work with vendors who were I didn't deal with any international vendors. You had to be able to get the stuff here, and that way I reached out to previous vendors that I've dealt with in the past, and was comfortable enough to have the conversation that I was comfortable that they would be able to supply us in a timely fashion of the goods and services that we needed. And I think that a lot of people were kind of surprised that we were able to get stuff, but again, it was based off of prior relationships and their ability to meet the needs that we had that I've had in the past. So I trusted these vendors to do what they say they were going to do.
So for diverse business owners, one of the things, and I can tell you as a diversity professional, when I look at our spend and I look at, well, how much of that spend goes to diverse businesses, what I find is that those numbers are low. And we understand that there are a number of different barriers that may account for that. But at the same time, this is an opportunity for us to address that in terms of providing some real insight and information to diverse business owners of how they can get in the game, so to speak, how they can start establishing relationships with procurement professionals so that they have the opportunity to know who they are and what their abilities are. So December 9th, by way of example, is one of those days that we're committed to creating that platform and that opportunity for that exchange to take place. But outside of that, do you have some thoughts of approaches that business owners can take to really try and gather or develop some relationships without necessarily getting that steel curtain because calling me too much, you're doing too much. And I know it's a delicate balance,
It
but
is.
what have you find? What have you, and I'll ask the question to you this way, because I'm sure in your 30 years of experience that you've had all kinds of people who have reached out to you to try and connect with the supply chain that you are attached to. So maybe you can share what was an approach that was used that was successful, that you hadn't thought about that business, but because of the way that they approached you or, engaged you, it made you pause, give them a look, and ultimately established a relationship.
So I think a couple of things, and again, we probably could talk about this all day. I first and foremost, I think it's important that if you are a minority women-owned business, that you look to get accredited and certified at various organizations that certify you as a minority and women-owned business. I think that's important. I think over my career, one of the things that public companies would say, when that question came up, is that, yeah, we're looking for the services, but they're not any that are certified. And I think there's a lot of companies out there who don't understand the certification process. So I think that's important, because that's one of the avenues that in the past have been used not to do business with companies, because they'll say, well, the company called me and we checked into it, but they're not certified. So they wouldn't necessarily use those goods or services from that company. I think that one, that's important. Two, I think that you do have to develop a rapport with companies, and also I think that companies should also understand it is also how you. It's important that you even align yourself with other companies that can help provide support services and kind of in a second tier and first tier, to where you may not be able to do it individually, but collectively you can provide those services. So I think that's important also. And in the past, I think that's how I've developed some of the relationships that I have, where the company would call and say, I do X, Y, Z, and I see that you guys have a proposal for this. I can't supply the totality of what you need, but I can do this component of it. And I think those type of things are different areas of how individual diverse companies can kind of work. I do think it's important that you communicate to the purchasing folks that you are a minority and women-owned business, a small business, veteran business, and that you'd like to provide them some information. These are your services. There are a lot of times, because you have to understand, you're not the only company calling on these purchasing individuals, that it can become overwhelming, where you're constantly getting calls and things of that nature. I think you just want to kind of ensure that they have your information and ensure that they understand what it is that you do, and again, communicate or ask the questions. How do they go about posting their bids? Where do you post your bids? And then when those opportunities come up, I think I would reach out and say, I see that you guys are putting this service out. I just want to kind of reintroduce myself, and we'll look to possibly participate in that RFP or RFP or quotation.
Thank you for that, Jeff. I think one of the things that you touched upon, and with the time that we have left, because I believe we have questions in the chat, I do want to talk about businesses partnering with other businesses to respond to requests for proposals. I say that because I've also had the opportunity to be on review committees that actually look at some of these requests for proposals, the bids that come in. And oftentimes what you'll see is that there'll be a prime, and then they partner with subs, other businesses, to provide the full scope of services. And one of the things that I see from my standpoint, particularly because of the emphasis and the focus by the state of New Jersey on ensuring that we're diversifying our supply chain, is that we'll see primes that will come in, not just in state, but out of state for some of these big contracts, but they will partner with, diverse businesses as part of their solicitation, because it's, frankly, it's a good look, right? That I might be from Oklahoma and I have the engine to do all of this. However, when it comes to who's going to do our media and our marketing, I'm going to use a diverse local business in New Jersey, or I'm going to use, when it comes to, another area, security or whatever, a diverse business. So we are seeing that. And I know at the summit, we're going to have not just our procurement professionals, but we are going to have some of the large primes that have the capacity and are, pretty hooked into the state's supply chain because of their ability to be able to provide these goods and services. So I would say to many of our businesses who are on this call, and for those of you who will be participating, as Jeff said, that you want to also make sure that you look at not just the procurement professional, but look at some of the companies or the larger companies that are responding to these bids or have responded to these bids, and introduce yourself to them as well. We know that that's done generally on construction contracts where you have a general contractor, but they sub the project out to a lot of different subcontractors for plumbing, for electrical, for security, for a number of different things. That same concept can also be used not just in a construction contract, but also in a contract for goods and services as well, particularly if it's a large contract. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add to that, Jeff, in terms of businesses really kind of trying to onboard in as a sub and not necessarily as a prime?
No, I totally agree with you. And what I want to say is, with the state and climate that we're in now is a good time to look for those relationships with these larger companies, because they are really looking at doing business with minority companies to assist and responding to the public and to some of the core values that are changing with regard to that. So I think it's important that again, as we both alluded to, that not only do you look to supply services on a first tier basis, but also align yourselves with some of these larger companies for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you for that. And before we break out for questions, I want to talk a little bit about, because I'm sure this is on the minds of some, we're in this pandemic environment. And as a result, and you alluded to that in one of your answers, there's been a priority and a shift in terms of the goods and services at many of our departments and agencies, public institutions, as well as private institutions, had to source for in their supply chains, right? Can you talk a little bit about, because you mentioned this term, sole source and waivers. Can you educate our participants on what those are, how they're used, and how they may come into play in this type of environment?
Sure. So a sole source or a single source is basically you can only get this product from this particular vendor. And there's usually copyrights and things of that nature included with that process. It is important that the procurement person, a lot of companies will say, I'm a sole source vendor or a single source vendor. I think that the onus then becomes on the procurement person to go out and seek and ensure that there are no like vendors out there to kind of validate completing this form and submitting it with regard to being the only company that provides those type of services. So in that regard, you don't have to go out and do a bid and things of that nature if you can truly validate that they are the sole source and single source vendor.
And is that when a waiver is applied?
Yes.
And so would you be able to give an example of a sole source contract? Sure.
So a lot of community colleges use a platform called Illusion. Illusion is the company that typically we use. Illusion's platform and how it integrates with a lot of the community colleges and their students. There's not too many. Once it's integrated, it's very difficult to find a compatible company that has integrated with the tools you need. I think that then you have to go through a whole, review and change of systems to do that. So in that regard, them as a vendor are really a sole source vendor for that product because they built it. They've integrated it with understanding community colleges and colleges. So they built their tool that way. So it becomes very difficult to find an equivalent company.
Thank you for that. I see the time is 10:49. And so what I want to do is open it up for questions. Sir Fraz, are you with us?
Yep. Hi, Hester. I'm going to read off a couple questions and hopefully we can get to as many as possible. And anything we don't get, we will try to get in touch over email. I believe we covered this briefly in the beginning, but a question from Laura Marcolini. Can you describe the differences between RFPs, RF quotes, qualifications-based selection processes?
So I can tell you that the criteria and qualification process for a community college, which is different than some of the other organizations, is the lowest responsible bidder for RFP or RFQ. Request for bid, request for proposal. State statutes require that we award. The awarding criteria is lowest responsible bidder.
Okay, thank you for that one. I'm going to pull up, I'm just going to go through order here. One is asking, how would they know the thresholds that exist? You mentioned thresholds earlier. Is that evident in the proposal itself?
It usually you can find those on the state website. With regard to what the current thresholds are, but they're pretty much the same across the board. What for community colleges, for Board of Educations, and for municipalities, the state sets what those guidelines are.
Got it. Question here from Ellen McCabe, and it has a lot of interest. How do you get on every vendor's list to receive RFPs, RFQs, and other bidding opportunities? They cite, for example, Rutgers, but I know you're at the community college system. Is there a listserv that people can sign up for? How does one?
You know, different entities do things differently. We don't necessarily keep a database of vendors. I did work for Rutgers. It's as you contact the purchasing folks, we from a perspective, you know, internally, you know, keep a list. Some schools actually post. Some colleges actually post their vendor list on their website. So different people do it different ways. There's no one consistent approach that individuals take with regard to vendor lists.
Got it.
Dr. Foss, before you ask the next question, I just want to remind that our participants that we're going to be going through the ABCs of procurement this week. We have several speakers that are lined up to give you an understanding from different vantage points. By way of example, Hakima Qualms from Princeton University will be on this afternoon at 2, talking specifically about federal contracting and procurement, large construction projects that they have on board at Princeton University, walking you through that process. We'll also have Wes Coleman from Rutgers University, as well as Amy Davis from the Department of Treasury, Division of Purchase and Property. So I just want to remind everyone that we are going to try and give you as many different perspectives and approaches of how procurements are handled from different vantage points. So Jeff is giving you a multitude in terms of the county colleges, the municipalities, as well as the private sector, but there's more. Thank you, Sir Frost.
No problem. A question that we're getting here, I'm going to kind of group a few questions together to pose this one. Some of the commentators have, or questioners rather, have been saying that sometimes to overcome a bid, they're typically getting caught up with the lack of experience. So they're applying for bids and they're told they don't have enough experience and therefore they're not eligible to participate. And wondering any advice that you would have to how do you overcome that lack of experience to help procure these bids and to win these bids?
Well, I think one of the things that we talked about earlier, and you know, is that look to align yourself with other companies that do have experience. I think that you know there are bids that we put out from a community college perspective that we require that you have 3 to 5 years experience with a similar school or entity. So that is something that is true. But I think if you don't have the experience, I think you got to kind of look to align yourself with some of those other companies or sister companies that can assist and go with you, kind of both go in that on the bid process. That would be one of my suggestions, because that's not something you can just kind of overcome.
Got it. You had given some advice earlier about reaching out to procurement professionals to kind of be aware of opportunities and to learn more. One of the commentators though is saying due to COVID-19 and people working from home, it's harder to reach. Do you have any advice to get to people in this COVID-19? Do you think it's better to try to approach folks with email? Or how do you navigate that? I think that work from home challenge is posing a challenge for different participants. Well,
I think with regard to that, that's a good question. I think for me, from my perspective, the best way to deal with it's via email, because a lot of our phones are being transferred, or people are calling the office, people are not in the office. So I think one sure way of is email communication, because we even though we're working at home, we still check our emails.
Right. That makes the most sense here. I'm just trying to go through some questions here. Somebody's asking, do you have any advice to how do you identify though and try to match with the bigger partners that you suggested pairing up with to go forward?
I would look at what industry you're in, and then I would look at who are the major players in that industry. I mean, again, you can kind of go online and search and see who are some of those individuals locally, see who are some of those players nationally. It's just really understanding the industry that you're in.
Got it. That makes most sense. Somebody's asking for bids. Do you generally go with the lowest bid, or do you go with your most trusted vendor?
For again, the current role that I am in, we are required by state statute to go with the lowest responsive bidder. We don't have flexibility to award outside of that, unless, again, professional services you can award outside of lowest responsible bidder, but other goods and services we have to.
So thank you so much for the answer.
And Jeff, I want to just make sure that we give some clarity on that because that is a big distinction. And so, yes, as a whole, I think it's important for the audience to understand that for public contracting entities, these are your tax dollars. So we need to be responsible with your tax dollars and ensure that we're getting the best price for what it is that we're contracting for as it relates to goods and commodities. However, for professional services, I think that those are in a different category in the same way that we said RFQs are different from RFPs, because not everyone provides the professional services in the same way. And so in the instance of professional services, they're not always limited to the lowest price, because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that the services that are being provided are going to meet the scale and scope of what you have intended. So professional services aren't always strictly adhered to. Price is a factor, but it's not the only factor.
Correct.
And I think we have time for one last question.
Yep. Jeff, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, is there a recommended best form of contact?
Sure. You can, my email address, J Roberson Jr, JROBERSON JR @hccc.edu.
And Jeff, if you don't mind, if you can write that in the chat while
Sure.
I close. Well, I want to again thank all of you who participated in this morning's session, ABCs of Procurement. I hope that you walk away having a better understanding of some of the vehicles that are used by procurement professionals, as well as some of the things that you need to consider for your business and strategizing how you want to onboard into the various supply chains that are available to you here in the state of New Jersey. As I indicated this afternoon, we are going to have Pakima Qualls from Princeton University. She's going to talk more specifically about procurement from the federal side and more specifically about many of the procurement opportunities that are available there at Princeton University. Similarly, on Wednesday of this week, we're going to have Amy Davis from the Department of Treasury, Division of Purchase and Property. Her unit purchases on behalf of many of the state departments here in New Jersey, as well as Wes Coleman from Rutgers University, because as Jeff indicated, Rutgers is a little bit different. It has its own statute, and how it handles procurement is unique to Rutgers University. So the information that is being provided to you today, as well as even from Treasury, is going to be different as it relates to Rutgers. So you'll have an opportunity to hear from and speak to Wes as well. So again, thank you all. For questions that we were not able to get to, we will reach out to you. Remember, registration for the 2020 Garden State Minority Women Veteran-Owned Business Summit is going to be opening up this week. We'll be sending out information, and I encourage you, as always, to go to the website for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. That is www.diversity.nj.gov, to keep you up to date with not only these procurement readiness webinar series, but all the information that will assist you as a business owner as we move forward to December 9th. Have a wonderful morning. Thank you.